Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz pianist, composer, arranger, and educator, the great Billy Test. We caught up with him about his new 2021 CD with the Billy Test Trio, Coming Down Roses. It's his debut as a band leader full of original compositions featuring Billy on piano, Evan Gregor on bass, and Ian Froman on the drums. He grew up in Philipsburg, Pennsylvania, and later he relocated to New York City to follow his music ambitions. During his time on the New York scene, he has performed at Carnegie Hall, the Village Vanguard, and so many other hallowed joints. He's got great stories. Enjoy.
Thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. I appreciate it.
Oh, man, thanks for making time for me. That's awesome.
You bet. Absolutely. My pleasure. So your latest CD, your 2021 CD with the trio, Coming Down Roses, comes out during what I would like to have said a month ago was kind of the winding down of the pandemic, but again, we're shoved into ambiguity. But it still is an avenue to communicate with the fans, and I'm sure there's still a possibility of live shows. Give me your thoughts on the timing of this release and how it feels to be coming out right now.
That's such a great question, because I think all of us that are coming out with records right now had in our minds that, you know, the record's going to come out and then you can play 1,000 gigs or hopefully play 1,000 gigs. And we were all kind of trying to time our releases so that things would end at the end of this thing. But my thought was really that whether people are able to go to concerts or not, people are sitting at home wanting something to listen to. So the hope with this, when we decided to put it out now, was if things opened up, great. If things didn't open up, you know, a record is kind of, I know I've spent a lot of time in the pandemic listening to a bunch of stuff that I hadn't really had a chance to check out, or things that maybe I wouldn't have normally listened to. And then I just assumed that maybe there were a bunch of people that were doing the same thing that I was, that were just looking for something different to listen to or something new to listen to and check out. So we'll see. I have a couple of concerts planned in October. And, you know, we had a nice record release last weekend at the Deerhead Inn. And everybody was wearing masks and being super careful. So hopefully it keeps going in a good direction, although the numbers look scary for sure. That's kind of the thought behind it, that if you can't go out and play in front of people, maybe a record is the next best thing.
So let's go into the artistic construction of this. What are you ultimately hoping the listener gets from this project?
This is my first project as a leader. And I'd played on a bunch of things as a sideman with Dave Liebman, and, you know, I'm in the WDR big band. So it's not the first time that I've recorded, for sure. But the hope from this record was to sort of present myself as my own thing. You know, the record has a bunch of tunes that I've written, and then it has a couple of maybe off-the-beaten-path standards, which is something that I personally really, really feel passionate about, trying to find tunes that don't get played that often. So the hope is that the listener hears this and recognizes that, you know, I'm not just the guy that's the sideman, but I write music on my own, and, you know, I have my own thing outside of all the other stuff that I do on a regular basis.
So talk to me about how a kid from Philipsburg, Pennsylvania, got to this point where you're a professional jazz musician.
I started piano lessons when I was 7, and, you know, there really was only one piano teacher in town, and I studied with her until I was 10 or 11, and, you know, she was super. And then when I kind of outgrew that, I went to another piano teacher that was like an hour away in Altoona. His name was Dave Villani, and Dave had studied at Temple and was a jazz musician and all of that. So I somehow as a youngster was really into ragtime music, and there was one piano lesson that Dave showed me some Fats Waller and some Art Tatum. It was like, you know, there's a whole lineage that goes beyond this. You know, from there he was showing me Earl Garner and Bill Evans and all of that, and I just really fell in love with the music. But that became very clear that as somebody that wants to be a jazz musician, as beautiful as Central Pennsylvania is, that's not exactly where the jazz hub of the world is happening. So I was gigging a little bit with people. Philipsburg is very close to Penn State. It was like playing with some Penn State professors and things like that. And so I knew when I went to school that I needed to get kind of close to New York. and I ended up going to William Patterson University for my bachelor's, and I went there just because I loved Mulgrew Miller. I was such a big fan of his playing, and he ended up being my main mentor there for 4 years. Yeah, after that I moved into New York and just sort of hit the ground running. I was just hungry for it. Whatever chance I had to take a lesson or go hear music or pick somebody's brains was just what I did.
What was the first live show you saw that really made you think, that's something I want to do?
I heard the Count Basie Band when I was 15, and that was definitely, I think that was the moment that was like, okay, this is what I've got to do. Because not only was the music just amazing, but everybody on the bandstand just had such a big smile from ear to ear. And there was so much love and humanity and just this feeling that this is what this music is supposed to be. That, you can do this for a living and you can have a great time. And I remember leaving that concert thinking, that's what I want to do. The first show I saw in New York it was Cedar Walton. I just walked into Birdland one night and was like, I don't care who's there, I'm going to go see them, and it happened to be Cedar Walton. And that also left a big impression. Also to be a 17, 18-year-old kid and to see somebody of that stature on essentially your first day in New York, that definitely leaves a mark, too.
Without a doubt. Well, and it has to be dream realized to have the opportunity to come to New York and to be at places like Mesro and Smalls and those places. What was your first real big gig in New York like when you realized, I made it, I'm here, I'm on the stage?
I think the one that there were several. You have several moments like that if your career, if you get lucky that your career starts to go to a certain place. I think the one that kind of shook me in my boots was when I got called to sub with the Vanguard band. And when I was living in New York, I was subbing pretty regularly with the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra. And, when you live in New York, the number of times you go to hear somebody at the Vanguard, that's just the place. And I remember in the first tune, just having this realization like, oh, I'm sitting on the stage, like I'm playing at the Vanguard. And this is no joke. Like this is, I'm here. And that was something that you dream about doing that from the time that you're first hearing Bill Evans at the Vanguard, Train at the Vanguard. When you hear all those records, you think, oh, I'd love to do that someday. But it seems like some distant thing that is unachievable that you can't do. And I think that was one of the moments that was like, oh, wow, maybe I've done what I've set out to do a little bit. Another moment was playing, when I get to play with Dave Liebman. Every moment like that is a reminder of, when you're sitting on stage next to somebody that's played with Miles Davis and Elvin and all of that, and somebody that's bringing that knowledge. I'm 32 at this point. And, I've had some great chances, but I didn't get to play with Miles and didn't get to play with Elvin. That certainly didn't happen in my lifetime and won't because they're gone. So those moments that I get to sit next to that kind of knowledge and that kind of connection to the jazz history and the jazz tradition, every time I have one of those moments, I think like, wow, I'm a lucky person. This is something really special.
Talk to me a little bit about, every day you wake up, you get to create something as a professional musician. What's the best part of being a professional musician for you?
There's so many of them. I'm kind of like a fish in water when you put me behind a piano. I'm just happy to be behind a piano. And there are lots of things that I love to play and lots of different things. I love practicing classical music and things like that. But the phrase that if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, it's kind of true, but also, playing an instrument and maintaining a certain standard, that does take a lot of work. But I'm thankful that for me, being a musician, I get such a feeling of personal accomplishment. Like, okay, I wrote something that, oh, this feels much better than other things that I've written, or something that I've been trying to get to come out on the piano, and hey, it's finally starting to happen. Those things feel like such a special thing. But also just the lineage of the history of what we do as musicians. You know, there's something that feels really special about that too. You know, if I'd have been a banker, I don't get the feeling that somebody at my profession would be like, well, you know, but this banker from the 50s, that guy was the bomb. I really get the feeling that that's not a part of it. So there is this feeling of like somehow dipping into this stream of the arts and stream of music and getting to just kind of discover every day. I was lucky to spend a lot of time around Frank Kimbrough, and I remember him saying one time that, you know, as musicians, we should think of ourselves more like doctors and lawyers when they use the word practice. Like doctors and lawyers, they own their practice. It is what they do. They practice law. They practice medicine. And as musicians, we practice music, and that encompasses everything, whether it's actually practicing the piano, or going to a concert, or composing music. So I think one of the things that I really love is just all the things that it's involved, that it takes to do one of these things. The writing is fun, the playing is fun, the experience of meeting new musicians and playing with people, and, you know, getting to know them personally and musically, and things like that. It's really just an amazing career and an amazing thing to get to do. I think anyway. I've been really lucky.
If you could go back in time, if you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger self around the time that you were starting to play professionally, and based on what you've learned throughout all of the years, give your younger self one piece of advice, and this isn't a regret question, this is just wisdom that we get, what would you tell your younger self?
That's a great question. I think I would tell myself just to keep going. It's funny because I can't think of one thing directly, but I remember as a young person starting this, there's always that big question of like, is this going to actually work? And I've done a lot of teaching, and that's always a big question with students, like, am I going to be able to put food on my table doing this? Am I going to be able to sustain a career doing this? And just the self-trust is hard for a young person to find sometimes. That, you know, yes, practicing 4 or 5 hours a day, that's the right thing to do. Or, you know, just the self-trust element of, is this going to pan out, can be such a challenging thing. So I think if I could go back and just tell myself, like, just trust yourself. Don't second guess. And I think that applies for other young people that want to play and want to be professional musicians. You know, there are a million moving pieces that you can't control. But the one piece that you always can control in a way is you. You can control how much you practice. You can control how much you work with other people. You can control how easy you are to work with. You can control how positive you are on the bandstand or negative you are on the bandstand. And I think those were things that are easy to overlook. And I think when I was a young person, it was sometimes easy to think, oh, but what about this and what about this? What about these things that I don't have any control over? And I think just going back and saying, just keep your head down and play the piano. That's what you got to do. That's how this works. I think that would have been maybe the best advice I could have given myself, or any young person for that matter.
So, you know, when we do, I know right now we're kind of in a weird gray zone, but when we do return to live music in earnest, what do you hope we all realize about the long absence from live music, both the musician and the crowd?
The whole thing is really a special dynamic. You know, with the WDR Big Band, we've done a ton of live streams. There's an awareness that when there is no other alternative, that's super. It's a great thing to do. But I think we all realized very early on how much we need the audience. And it's something that we're always aware of, but it's amplified so much when you just go a year and there's nobody real in the audience clapping for you. So I hope that the audience feels that too and realizes, like, oh, the musicians need this too. We're just as an important part of this music picture as the person that's on the stage. And I get the feeling that at this point, people are hungry for music, and people are hungry for that experience of sitting there and hearing something live. I love listening to music as much as everybody else, but there's just something different when you're in the room. And I really hope that when we get on the other side of this, that maybe people are a little more inclined to go to concerts than they were before, just to realize that it really is a gift and that it's not something to be taken for granted. Because I think it's really easy, too, to think, there's this concert on Friday, but I can see them the next time they come to town, or I can wait, or I don't really feel like it, I'd rather just sit at home. And I really hope that people start remembering, but it's a treat that somebody's in town, or it's a special thing that somebody's around. And that music isn't always this kind of given it's going to be there, I can always go to a concert. Because I don't know what this is going to look like when this thing is done, but I'm sure it will never look the same. Who knows? But just the fact that we can eventually go to concerts again, I hope everybody remembers how special that is and how much of a privilege it is for all of us, musicians and concert goers alike, that we can go and hear some music.
So final question, everyone has an idea or a perception of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately, every day you live your life, you have your own perception. Who do you think you are?
That's a great question, too. There's the perception of myself as a musician, and there's the perception of myself as a person, and then there's the perception of mixing that, too, because we're not just a musician, we're people first. As a person, when I wake up, the first thing I'm thinking about is how good can I make today, whether that's reading books or, what can I learn today to be a better world citizen. And I think that's really, really important to me, especially in the world that we're living in today. Just the simple thought of how can you make somebody smile is a pretty important thought in the course of the day, and shouldn't be quite as complicated as it seems to be these days. And as a musician, I think of myself as somebody who's kind of a giver. When I sit down on the bandstand, whether it's my band, whether it's me as a sideman with a singer, whether it's my work at the WDR Big Band, there's always a feeling of what can I do to make it better? Or what can I do to make things the best that they can be? So if I'm comping for a soloist, I sometimes joke that I want to be known as the great enabler. That, you want to go there, I'm with you. You want to go there, I'm also with you. And just sort of cultivate something that the fact that I'm there, things are better. I don't get to decide that. Other people get to decide that. But that's what I want people to feel from my presence on the bandstand. And I guess that carries over into my other areas of life, too. That I just hope that I'm a giving person with a good heart that you can feel whether I'm behind a piano or just sitting and having a chat about what I read in the news or read in the book or watched on Netflix or whatever,
Billy, thank you for opening up about the new album, this strange world we're in, and your life in music. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Pennsylvania, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Billy for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.